Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be doing a tier list for the best resources in Civilization 7 in the Antiquity Age. This should be relatively self-explanatory, but I did want to comment that the resources do have sort of variable scaling, and this will go into our consideration. Stuff like the +2/+2 resources will be the very best types of resources to have at the beginning, and we are going to have a consideration for being strong in the beginning, being strong in the middle, and being strong at the end. And so as a consequence, some resources, while they kind of look better objectively in terms of what yields they have, because they're worse at a different section of the game than the other ones, they won't be quite as good. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with camels. Now, camels are a very, very strong resource. They do allow you to slot in 2 additional resources, and this can be critically important because if you have an abundance of resources, which is often easy to achieve if you have good settles, or you happen to roll settles where you're going to have a lot of extra resources, this will be really good. In particular, you do want to push for slottable resources earlier on, because when you have a lower amount of cities, slottable resources are better, and as such, you usually run out of slots to put stuff in, and camels will allow you to put more stuffs in, and they will also allow you to stack a whole bunch of resources in a single city, which can be strategically useful sometimes. Now, spreadsheet warning, just a little bit of a digression here, is that generally speaking, we have the spreadsheet to evaluate kind of the net value that is produced by buildings in Antiquity, and that is relativized towards a sort of value schema where we think that different yields are worth different resources. And one important takeaway on this is that in particular, the lighthouse and the market are not very good at producing value. This is the other way in which you would gain other resource slots. So as such, coming in on camels are going to be spectacular. They're often going to be a resource you want to prioritize, not necessarily in your first and second city, but any city after that, they are going to be absolutely insane. And by city, I mean settlement. All right, so coming up next, we have cotton. Now, cotton is +2 +2 food, +2 production, and I do think that this is unambiguously the best resource to start on, and is so far ahead of the other ones. All the +2/+2 resources are good, but I do think cotton is going to be the best, and so we are going to put it just after camels. It also scales relatively well into the late game, in that you can use it for the production, you can use it for the food. It's flexible in that way. Food is going to be particularly strong on stuff with a very little population, and then it's going to dramatically fall off. And so we'll get to cotton, and then we'll kind of talk about something that can be compared about cotton in just a little bit in Gypsum here. Next up, we have dates. Dates is +2 food, +2 happiness, which is very strong to have early on. It will also allow you to kind of fiddle around to boost over negative happiness if this is something you run into. And so having a lot of these types of resources will very often allow you to come on in and... Sorry, one second. Will very often allow you to come in and build over the settlement limit without going into negative unhappiness. And so as a consequence, we're going to put them pretty high in A tier here. Okay, next up we have the dies. Now the dies is going to be +3 happiness, so it is going to be less overall yields than something like the dates, but I do think happiness is a little bit better than food overall. However, it's not going to be as timely, or having the flexibility of being able to put food on a low resource or low population settlement is really good. You don't necessarily have this with dies. Dies does have the advantage of really being able to push happiness in a particular slot, but it is also going to be generally on a fishing tile, which is often a little bit harder to get to with proper settles and this type of stuff. We're going to put dies in C tier. Notably, 33% less yields than something like the dates. Next up, we have fish. Now, fish is an interesting resource because, just briefly kind of talking about this, going over the spreadsheet, food has diminishing marginal return, or very significant diminishing returns. The point of food is to be able to grow your town/city so you can get new yields, although very particularly early is good for growing so you can gain new resources. Something that is important to note with regards to food specifically is that is very, very strong early on when you're at low numbers. If you look at how many growths you can get in 100 turns with marginal food. Here, the value we're looking at is 10. We can make it 4, which is a little bit closer to the fish. You'll see that you will be able to really ramp up growth quite quickly in something that's a low population. So I think there's this interesting thing where having 1 to 2 fish resources is really good, because the second you settle a town, you can put the food in there and it will help it to grow really fast, and you'll get additional yields pretty quickly, after which point the food kind of falls off. We're going to put food in B tier with the kind of understanding that if it's your first food resource, maybe it's at higher B tier, and if it's your second or third food resource, it's probably pretty low / not really worth much. So it's really going to be the first one available is going to be good. Dates, notably, fills a role similar to the way food does, specifically because happiness is not it's not a yield that you specifically want to be getting inside your cities relative to towns, and so it's a pretty good one for slotting into towns. You know, thinking of, we will get to sheep, or wool rather, but wool gives production and happiness. You'd rather not be slotting production into towns, and so, okay. Next up, we have gold. Gold is a really powerful resource. It decreases, or it increases the amount of gold value your gold has when spending towards purchasing buildings. In the Antiquity Age specifically, very often you are selling something and then you're buying warehouse tiles to be able to gain access to other resources faster, boost the population of the city, and to grow overall. I think that very often when you are spending gold, you are spending it on buildings, and this makes all that gold more valuable. And so I do think it is quite a strong resource. It stacks really well. It is nicer the more cities you have and the bigger your empire is, so it's less strong on your first few cities. We're going to put this into A tier behind the dates. Next up, we have gypsum. Now, we talked about how gypsum was an interesting one to compare to cotton, because gypsum, as you get into the middle and late game, is going to be kind of better than cotton as long as you still have a good amount of slots, thinking about the camels. And the reason why is gypsum gives +2 production, and then if it's in a city that is not your capital city, it gives +4 production. Production is generally a more valuable yield than food, and so +4 production is better than 2 food and 2 production. However, it's not anywhere near as good early on, because if you settle it with your capital, you're only going to get 2 production. And if you settle it with the town, you can't slot it into the town. And so, in particular, it's not going to really shine until later on. But when it does get there, it will be kind of the most valuable resource. That is a slottable resource in particular. By the time gypsum is good, though, maybe gold is a gold resource is going to be better than gypsum just in general. And so, although gypsum will be better when you're not really buying stuff just yet, just as an initial yield, gypsum also has the advantage of being a resource that is on a mine. Specifically, so far we have seen, I believe this is a camp resource, and then a plantation, fishery, fishing boat. These 2 resources, notably on mines, do make them more valuable, and maybe we should be valuing this a little bit more in terms of how we are doing this ranking, because the mines, anything that's a mine, a camp, or a woodcutter is going to generally be a better thing to have as a workable tile than a food-oriented thing, but this is something to think about, but it's not going to push the needle as much in terms of our rating. We're thinking more in terms of the resource itself. Next up, we have the furs. Now, notably, the furs, this gives +3 production. It can be slot anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a city. Production in towns gets turned into gold, and so production in towns really isn't all that great. And so if we're slotting something into a city, gypsum's generally going to be better. The counterexample is this gets slot into the capital really well, and you probably slot all your furs into the capital, and before you get other available cities, furs will be better than gypsum. And so to some extent, this is good, but it's in the specifics of like the really early game, it's better, and then mid and later portion of the Antiquity Age, it is going to be worse. We're going to put this over here in B tier, where it's going to be a solid one. Production's more valuable than food, but we're actually going to put it just ahead of fish. I'm consulting my cheat sheet where we have already done this to the side. I think it is better than fish. I think I would rather have the first fish resource to the first furs resource, but not if it is in the early game. Something like this. If we're settling towns and we already maybe have gypsum and we already have a bunch of stuff slotted into our cities, then maybe don't like furs as much as the first of this, but otherwise we'll probably just prefer any amount of furs. Okay, next up we have horses. Horses give a bonus to cavalry specifically. I don't think that this bonus is really that good. I think that cavalry is generally a little bit weak overall in the context of the age. They do get a bonus versus infantry, and maybe I'm misevaluating this in terms of the military. I think in general you shouldn't rumble too much with the AI, and so if you're rumbling, you're probably going to have a worse outcome anyways. And I think that generally you want to focus on ranged units rather than cavalry, and use infantry units to kind of hold the line against them. Something to this effect. We're going to put these into D tier. I think that since you are going to be tech gated, very often the horses just aren't going to be performing quite as well. Next up, we have the incense. Now, the incense is an interesting one because science is generally more valuable than production. However, you have to be getting... you have to be getting more science, or you have to be getting 10 science in order to get just a +1 off this yield. So the incense is going to be really valuable for specific countries or nations, especially if you are thinking someone like the Meier, where you are getting a lot of science from your unique building. You have the unique building plus town, you're pushing over 10 science, or you have, in particular, if you have a unique wonder that gives you science yields, I believe, what is it, the Grand Canyon gives plus science yields to adjacent, something like this. There's going to be situations where incense is going to really, really hyper perform, but in general, I think it is going to be a little bit of a weaker resource, and so we're going to put it kind of at the edge of B tier. It's going to be really good sometimes. A lot of the times, it's just going to give you a third of the science, and you'll just kind of shrug your shoulders and be like, okay, I guess this is fine. I guess this is okay. Next up, we have iron. I do think iron's a little bit better than horses, or quite a bit better than horses, because in general, there's more melee units that are unique units that allow you to push timings a little bit better. I think using the melee units as fodder for the archers makes a lot of sense. I think the texture of getting the horses or the cavalry units so late in the game is going to be such that you'll often get a little bit more use out of iron. We're going to put iron behind incense. Next up, we have the, elephants, which, if I recall correctly, there's 3 different tiles that they give plus wonder production on. I believe it is desert, plains, and tundra? No, this gives tundra, grassland. I forget the exact one. It might be just desert and plains. But the point is it gives extra wonder production. I'm not 100% sure which wonders are of higher priority. I haven't thought this through as much, or which number of wonders can be slot onto tiles given from either ivory or from the marble. My suspicion is that it is going to be that marble is going to be a little bit better than ivory, but we're going to put both in B tier. They're not slottable resources. The extra production towards wonders is particularly strong, though, and so we're going to put them up there. Next up, we have the Jade. Now, this one I have a little bit of a mixed feeling on, in that we've observed the game operating in 2 different ways, and now we're not sure how it operates. And so here's the TLDR. Trade routes, before one of the latest patch, it seemed that trade routes would give gold to the city that they are originating from, which means you can have all of your trade routes originating from a single city. And then you can have that city produce tons and tons of gold. If that is the case, then Jade is going to be pretty good, or is going to be at least in B tier. However, what we have observed recently is that the trade routes were not going to the city where that produced the merchant, and or they were bugged in a Carthage run of ours. I'm assuming that the trade routes are just not working properly, not giving gold directly to the city, but instead just giving the gold to the state. If you are not achieving gold in a city, in particular and pushing it, then this is going to not be that good a resource, and it can't be slotted into towns. This is a city-only resource. And so it's going to be rare to get more than 1 or 2 gold. Gold is a really hyper valuable, and so Jade is generally going to be something you leave slotted out, or you use to force your ability to go on to the next age and achieve a golden age. It will be useful to that extent. If you can get a bunch of gold in a city, it would be good, but since it doesn't seem like, and so maybe with certain civs like Axum it'll be good, or civs that are getting good gold buildings. But recall, when we talked about evaluating the buildings, generally speaking, we think that the Market of Lighthouse aren't very good and take a really long time, like 150 turns to recoup their value in terms of investment. With that kind of context, it's difficult to push the gold up specifically. So we're going to put gold at the back of D tier with a heavy-handed asterisk that in instances where you can start to bring up the gold production in a city specifically, the value goes way, 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 way up. Okay, next up we have a sugar, which gives, or it's actually not called sugar in this age, it's called something else. It's the same art asset, if I recall correctly. We're going to call it sugar, but this is going to give +2 food and +4 if it's in a city that is not the capital. Now, unfortunately, food tends to fall off, as we discussed, after you've had several growth events. Like, let's say if you're on a population of 7, you've had 6 growth events, it starts to take a lot of food, because of the exponential growth in cost, to move up onto the next growth event. With just a population of 7, it's already going to take you 13 turns, and 4 marginal food is going to take you 100 turns to give you another growth event. This is not going to generate yields very quickly in terms of the purpose of food being generating yields in cities. It would be really good if you could slot it into towns, but it's a city-only resource. So we're going to put it at the back of C tier here. Next up, we have the unique resource that you can get from city-states that are economic city-states. If I recall correctly, this gives either +4 or +6 production and 5% gold. It's unambiguously the best resource. We're going to put it at the top of S tier. Ahead of the camels. Next up, we have the clams. The clams is a city-only resource that gives 2 happiness / 4 happiness if it is slot into a city that's not the capital. Generally speaking, this is not going to be that effective, but there are instances where it allows you to push you over negative happiness. I think that, generally speaking, it's only those situations where it's particularly good. If you have a bunch of slots, it's kind of okay. But if you're pushing the resources really fast, generally often what happens if you have way too many slottable resources, you actually have to start leaving resources slotted out to avoid triggering the golden age to push the age forward if you're looking to do a quadruple golden age. And so often I've found that since they're not that much of a rush, they're not that important, often by the time I'm getting them, I'm not even slotting them in because I'm trying to avoid pushing the next golden age, and I would prefer a resource that's not a slottable resource that just gives a bonus inherently, like the marble, the ivory, the wines, the silver, these types of things. And so we're going to put this down into a C tier behind the dyes. I think the dyes are, even though it's less yields, they're more flexible because they can go into towns, and they are going to be more useful in more contexts. And specifically, towns are going to have more difficulty utilizing buildings to stay above a happiness threshold if you are going over the settlement limit. And so we're going to put it in like that. Next up, we have salt, which gives extra production towards units. Salt is kind of hard to evaluate, and I think I might be misevaluating it. I feel like, generally speaking, you're buying your units rather than producing them as a general heuristic, but this could just be a playstyle thing, and I could be getting this wildly wrong. I think that, generally speaking, though, you're either building buildings or buying units where you need them, and are leaning more on gold to produce units and production to produce, long-term value in the way of buildings. And in this context, when you're not pushing a lot of units, it's not very good. However, it's pretty okay early on, in that it does go towards settlers. And so when you're in a phase of the game where settlers are occupying as a proportion of all your production between all of your cities, which when you just have a capital city is all your production, having this is pretty good. And so it is like kind of a weird sort of spike in the early game where it's good. After that, I think it's functionally not very useful. And I find in most of my games I don't really produce too many units, if any. And so I feel like I'm not getting the value out of it. I'm going to bump it up from my kind of initial belief that it's maybe in C tier, and we're going to put it kind of at the end of B tier here, maybe just a little bit ahead of the iron. I do think that it has a niche kind of thing in that it's going to be good in the relatively early age, and also in terms of if you think about the yields on, you know, the tile themselves, if I recall correctly, there's good yields on this, and then specifically you're working a mine here. Mines and woodcutters are going to be good, and so maybe from that perspective it's bumped up a little bit and doesn't deserve to be down here in C tier with a bunch of buildings that are not going to be that great. Although, to be fair, in D tier we do have a camp building. Actually, this might be pasture, and this is a mine. To the extent that this is just a mine that gets extra yields, I guess it's somewhat useful, but it's not going to generate you too much more gold. Anyways, next up we have silk. I think there are more natural wonders that give culture, and if you hit a natural wonder that gives culture, the silk is really, really good because you can stack a lot of culture in one city, and also there are a lot more unique buildings that provide silk than science. Coming over to the spreadsheet real quick, if we took a look at the antiquity buildings and the ones that are going to be unique buildings, we have like the Matsaba, the Parthenon, the Great Wall, the Pare Deza. A lot of these are going to be giving culture. There's a lot of culture stuff going on. Notably, I do think that monuments are extremely good, so you're going to put them like everywhere. And so as a consequence of kind of like all these things together, I think you're going to have a much easier time getting decent amount of culture yields out of this than you will have getting science yields out of incense. And so we're going to put this pretty high into B tier. All right, next up we have the silver. Silver is going to allow you to gain extra gold towards purchasing units. I think overall, throughout the entire age, you will spend more money purchasing buildings than you will purchasing units. However, I do think that this is pretty strong. We're going to put this at the top of B tier. In particular, I think that the most valuable instances of you being able to purchase stuff is often being able to use gold to grab resources in towns you just settled by pushing the boundaries of the towns utilizing buildings. And so as a result, this is why we have gold quite a bit higher than silver here. Also, it's kind of on theme to have it higher than silver. Next up, we have the wines. The wines will give you +2 happiness in the capital, which means it's going to be giving you +2 yields, but also the wines are going to be giving you 10% culture when you're in a celebration. These help push you to a celebration. I haven't really done a kind of a long look at how many turns are spent in celebration relative to non-celebration on average over the course of antiquity with kind of an average run. But I do think that, you know, with cards, often by the end of the age, which is happening maybe turn between 100 and 130, something like this, I have something to the tune of 5 to 6 card slots, which means maybe 40 to 50% of the age is spent in celebration, and so this generating that much culture for that period of time is particularly strong, but on its own, it's not going to be that good, and it's not going to be that good specifically in the early game, and so this one's a little bit hard to rate. I think what we're going to do is on our kind of practice run, we had thought that this was maybe A tier, but I think when you think about the amount of time that you spend in a celebration, it's actually quite high, and 10% culture during that time period is going to be a pretty good amount, a pretty good increase in terms of yields when stacked with the extra happiness that you're getting. So we're going to put it up into the top of A tier, I think. I do think that the thing is the cotton is just most explosive, like pretty unambiguously, and so I almost want to put it in S tier, but we're going to put it at the top of A tier. And next up we have the sheep. Sheep are going to give they're another +2 you know, resource. They're going to give 2 happiness and 2 production, and by sheep I mean wool. It's called wool, not sheep. Make wool, not sheep craft. Anyways, this one is going to give 2 production, 2 happiness, as we said. Generally, these are really, really good in the early game, and then they scale well into the late game. You can use it with a little bit of flexibility to keep places with high enough happiness, and then 2 production in any city is generally going to be pretty solid. I do think that it's probably better than Gypsum overall. Kind of maybe Gypsum we're like leaving out in the cold a little bit just because it's not very good early, in the same way sheep is, and sheep is also going to have the happiness kind of flexibility, so it's pretty nice as a resource. We're going to put it in A tier. Just to kind of quickly go through when we think these things are good, and also some texture to the thing. The camels is just an insane one when you can use it to slot in other additional resources. When you can't, it's actually not useful at all. I do think that the level of insanity justifies like the S tier, and it's going to be good in the middle to like late. Cotton is going to be just hands down the best resource at the very beginning of the game, and after that it just remains relatively solid. You can use it to grow towns that you just settled. You can use it to you know, kind of keep cities growth up relatively well, you know, especially because as a city you want to force production because you know food falls off. You're not going to be working any food tiles if you can avoid it, and so this helps to like kind of fill a gap in a lot of ways. And so this is going to be insane early, and then medium late it's going to be kind of, you know, a little bit of a thing. Wine is going to be strong medium to late, strong early, strong medium to late, strong medium to late, strong medium to late. Insane contextual on having a natural wonder. Really good when you're pushing wonders, generally pushes up the yields. Really good early, really good mid to late when you are founding towns. Contextually useful if you have the right setup. This one is going to be, salt is going to be kind of pretty good early on and then not very good, but my playstyle might just be such that I'm not producing units as often as I should, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it. The two that boost units I think are just generally kind of medium, not very good, but they are nice to have, I suppose. We have a bunch of happiness and food, plantation-oriented things. I think generally these are weak, and often you don't get enough out of the Jade, so I think it's just kind of weak. Dyes is sometimes useful for keeping happiness up, as are clams, but other than that, it's not going to be good. And by the time you can slot in the sugar, it's just not very good. Although it is a quarry tile, so that doesn't mean you're going to be able to work it. I think I said it was plantation earlier. That was my mistake. But anyways, this is the tier list as we have it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. If you like tier lists specifically, please let me know, because I can adjust what I'm doing depending on what people like, and we could do more of these. I think I am going to do a tier list for the best civs in Antiquity pretty soon here. Other than that, you know, notification bell, big nice on that one too. But other than all that, have a good day.